Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here again with another installment of my complete analysis of all 389 Bach chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Mit Freud und Freud, Ich fahr dahin, which translates to With peace and joy I go on my way in God's will. This is a really fascinating chorale, definitely modal influence. The melody must have been sourced from a time before Bach, like long before, because the melody flirts with the idea of D minor and A minor kind of at the same time, and Bach outlines that harmony very well. But there are some portions in the analysis where you sort of have to mix modal vocabulary and tonal vocabulary, which is always very fascinating from an analytical standpoint. But we should just hop right into the analysis, and I can talk about the piece's intricacies as we get to it. So we are in the key of D minor, despite the fact we have no key signature. Bach includes the B flats whenever he needs them for harmonic purposes. But yes, don't let the lack of key signature distract you. We start on D minor, and we get this really beautiful suspended cadence at the end on D major with the Picardy third that Bach loves so much. We start with a D minor triad, D, F, A, and D, with some passing tones in the lower voices. Then we get F, A, D, and A. That is another D minor triad, but this time in first inversion. Neighboring tone in the bass. Then we get yet another D minor triad in first inversion on the next beat, so no need to reanalyze. You get a passing seventh in the tenor, and the bass skips down to a D again, kind of turning it into a D minor 7 chord, but I'm not going to bother analyzing that because the 7th and the root are on the offbeat, so it's okay, it's pretty inconsequential. And then we have E, B natural, E, and G. Now in the key of D minor, this is a 2, not a diminished, but a minor 2, which is interesting. It's a byproduct of raising the 6th scale degree in the key of D minor. However, if we look ahead to the first cadence, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A minor, which is more of a reflection of the key signature. So we're looking for a point in which we modulate. One could make the argument that the modulation happens here at this F sharp, as that is the melodic minor fragment, 6-7-1 in the alto, but the melody starts to sound a little bit more like A minor around this part right here, with the G going up to the D and then descending down the scale to A. So oddly enough, this is where it sounds like it's happening to me, but in the key of A minor, this minor 2 in D minor turns into minor 5 in A minor. That's how I'm going to analyze it. Very strange modulation point. But this chord is strange in and of itself, as it doesn't tonally belong in either of the keys. So what is it doing there? I don't know. Bach has been known to use minor 5 chords, so here's another instance, I believe. Passing tone in the bass. Then we have C, A, F sharp, and D. D7 chord. That would be the dominant of G, but in this context we know Bach actually is really fond of using these dominant 4 chords, these dominant 7/4 chords in first inversion. So we see another 4-6-5 with an uppercase 4 with some passing tones on the 4 and of this measure, and here we get B, B, G sharp, and D. We know that this 4-6-5 chord is almost always paired with a 7 chord and diminished. Sometimes it's in root position, sometimes it's in first inversion. Either way, 4-6-5 to 7 is a progression that Bach has been using, and he used it in yesterday's chorale too. So check that out if you haven't already. A, C, A, and C. Well, that's a tonic triad, but there's no thirds, so it's still a 1 chord. We have a passing tone here. It kind of turns into 6 right here if we exclude this. Remember, these are 16th notes, so this D is very fleeting. And of course, the cadences get much more ornamental and contrapuntal so it's harder to pick apart the exact harmonies, but there's sort of like a one chord idea going on here. We then have D, F, G sharp, and B, or we could even say D, F, A, and B. We know that Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords, as that's B minor 7 flat 5 over D, and then as this is a perfect authentic cadence, the harmonic rhythm slows down in anticipation for the fermata. Therefore, we have a 5 right here, E, E, G sharp, and B, before we get 1, an A minor triad, A, C, E, and A. Overall, really interesting. I think the modulation happens here. One might even say that it happens on the previous beat. I don't know, but I hear it happening around here. That's just when the melody starts to sound like it's modulated. But that being said, we're still in the key of A minor up through the next cadence. It's another perfect authentic cadence in the key of A minor, so no modulation in this point. It's still sort of a descending scale passage until we get to A, and then we go B down to A, so the melody is largely A minor in this case. So A, E, A, and C. The voices just rotate. We know that Bach does that. And then we have D, F, A, and B. That's another 2-6-5 chord, right? B minor 7 flat 5 over D. And then we have some passing tones or some neighbor tones depending on the context. And here we actually have a 5 chord, E, E, G sharp, and B. We know that 2-6-5 usually goes to 5. It's like a cadential progression. And we're kind of preparing for a cadence right here, but it's happening earlier in the progression. So here we actually have a deceptive progression, F, C, A, and C. That is an F major triad in root position. In other words, that's a 6 chord. We have some more counterpoint going on. It's difficult to pick apart the exact harmonies. You could really get particular and find harmonies on all sorts of different beats, but really how consequential are they? We know that it's more so a byproduct. We're thinking on the x-axis here rather than the y-axis as far as the harmonies that are being generated are concerned, because it's much more contrapuntal. Every voice has its own rhythm in anticipation for a cadence, so we analyze where we can and where it makes sense to. So here we have D, A, F, and B. Again, 6 wants to go to 2, and it does. And then here we kind of get like another one of those passing 7 where the chord inverts, and I'll mark that because the chord remains intact for the most part. The only thing that changes is the bass, right? And we actually lose the 7th, so it just turns into a root position chord. So I'll just go ahead and write 5-3 there instead of 7-5-3. And then we're getting ready for cadence, right? So this is E, G sharp, E, and B with the passing 7th of the alto. That's just an E major triad. And then we cadence on A minor, a 1 chord. Alright, looking ahead to the next cadence on the next system, or at the first measure of the next system, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D minor. So we're going back to D minor, but that's not before we briefly visit the key of C major. If we look at the melody, we have B, C, B, C. It really sounds like C major is being highlighted here. There's no way around it. So this phrase does not retain one key. We're going to go ahead and say that this A minor right here is a common chord, because it's like A, B, C. That's kind of how I hear it, even though this is a longer note value, and I was hearing it at first as a direct modulation. I think we can make the argument that this is a common chord that bridges the two keys. So here we have a G major triad. Did I say J major? Goodness, G major. G, D, G, and B. That is a 5 chord in the key of C major. Sorry, I wrote A minor again. We modulated back to the same key. That's, no, we modulated to the key of C. So this is a 5 chord now. Passing tone in the bass. And then we get E, E, G, and C. C major triad in first inversion. Passing tone in the bass, G, D, G, and B, 5, G major triad, passing tone again with this F passing tone, and then we get E, C, G, C. That's another triad in first inversion that turns into root position on this beat, and then we get F, A, F, and A, or sorry, F, C, F, and A. That is an F major triad in root position, or a 4 chord, and I think this is where the modulation happens. So this 4 is now 3 in the key of D minor, because F is the relative major to D minor. And then we have on these beats some 9 chord tones, 2 Ds that turn the quality of the chord into a passing tonic triad. Whether or not it's super impactful on the harmony, I don't know. I think because a modulation just happened and we're seeing D now, I think it might be worth analyzing. So I'm going to offer that to the analysis. But like I said, that might not even be worth labeling if you're working on this chorale on your own. B flat, C sharp, E, and G. Well, that's a C sharp fully diminished 7th chord, so we know it's 7. But the B flat's in the bass, so that's not just 7, but 7, 4, 2. Kind of a rare chord. We don't see them all that often, but we have seen them before. And then we have all the voices moving here. We have G. It's interesting. We have this. We have C sharp, and we have. Actually, it's really not all that interesting. G, D, D, and F. Thirdless G chord. I don't think it's really worth analyzing. That would be. We don't know if it's minor. We don't know if it's major. I don't know, but it's going to A. So this would be like a 4 chord, but 4, 7. We don't know the quality of it. A, C sharp, and E. We know that that is a 5 chord. It's so interesting that this B flat, right? The bass matters so much. Like, what chords have B flat in them? We know that 6 does. We know that 4 does. We know that 2 has B flat in it, but we kind of we don't use 2 in with the B flat in the bass that much, because it would be second inversion, and we know second inversion triads get treated with much more caution. But also 7 has it if it's turned into a 7th chord, and that's exactly what's happening here. This 7-4-2 chord is a substitute for 4-6 or 4-6, 4-6 or 4-6, 6 or 4-6. That's difficult to say. I'm trying to. Hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say. It's a sub for. It's a dominant chord functioning as a predominant chord. It's very fascinating. And then we have passing tone here, D, F, A, and D. The alto gets real low, all the way down to A below middle C. Tonic triad, D minor. Okay, now we have the most interesting phrase in the entire chorale. We have some type of cadence on F. I don't know if it's a plagal cadence. I intuit it's a plagal cadence. It might also be a deceptive cadence. I'm going to put a question mark there because I'm going to offer 2 different analyses and see which one you agree with the most. I'd be interested to hear your insight about it on what you think, because Bach, we haven't. I don't think we've modulated. I think we've modulated, but it's very brief, kind of like this brief modulation to C major here. But for it to happen at a cadence is interesting because the phrase isn't very long. So we have C sharp, A, E, and A. That's an A major triad over C sharp, or 5-6. Neighbor tone in the bass, neighbor tone in the alto. Bach likes to pair the alto and the bass a lot, I've been noticing. C sharp, G, E, and A. Same chord again. And then the chord A, F, C sharp, and A. I don't think that's really worth analyzing. That would be like a 3 augmented chord in first inversion. Don't think it's really making too much of an impact. But it is going to be D and G. That is kind of interesting. I don't know. Maybe we will mark it. Maybe we will mark it as something going on. Maybe 3 plus 6 is happening here. I'll put a question mark by it because the chord is definitely happening on that beat, but it's so quick because the most of the half of the voices are moving with much more rapidity. So, but where does 3 augmented want to go? 3 augmented generally wants to go to 4 because F, A, C sharp usually wants to go to, that C sharp wants to go up to D, right? Am I thinking about that correctly? Yeah, I'm thinking about that correctly. 3 augmented wants to go to 4, and that's exactly what it does. It goes to we have B, F, D, and G. We have another 4, 6, 5 chord. But this time in the key of, let me make that V look more like a V, that's better. We're in the key of D minor. So whether or not that's happening, I don't know. But I think one way to kind of confirm that is to look at the context of what happens afterwards. We have C sharp, E, E, and G. And that is a 7 chord. So maybe that is what's happening right here. This is definitely a funky sound that's happening here. Depending on what your analysis is, this could be a number of different things, but maybe that is an augmented triad. We have D, F, A, and F. That is a root position tonic triad, a D minor triad over nothing, over the root of the chord. And then we have neighbor tone in the bass, passing tone in the soprano, or that's just, yeah, I guess it is a passing tone harmonically, but that's just the melody. So then we have D, F, B flat, and D. That is a 4 chord, or sorry, more specifically, that is a 6/6 chord. It's B flat over D, and then we get a passing tone up, and then we cadence on 3. So this is one version of the analysis. However, I'm convinced that the analysis is actually in the key of F major here. I'm going to go ahead and erase this. I wanted to offer that analysis. I actually did it a little out of order there, but I'll show you what I'm going to write D minor underneath here and write 1, 6, 6, 3 here. What I really think happens is that we've briefly modulated to the key of F major, very briefly, and this B flat chord is a 4/6 chord, and then we cadence on 1. So this cadence has eluded me because I don't fully know what to refer to it as, because it's like in one chord, this is kind of like a deceptive progression, because we would expect 6 to maybe go to 5, as 6 functioning as a predominant chord, but it goes to 3 instead, which is interesting. It's kind of like a, but this in D minor, 6 going to 3 is a roundabout way of also saying 4 going to 1 in the key of F major. This cadence is kind of weird. I don't know exactly how the analysis is supposed to be. I could probably do some more reading on it and see if, any Bach scholars out there have been, or have codified sort of a term for cadencing on a chord. I mean, 3 technically is functioning like a tonic chord here, and it could just be like a minor plagal cadence. But all in all, I really don't know. I intuit the fact that it is a plagal cadence in the key of F major. That's me looking at this piece through a largely tonal lens and making some modal concessions. But all in all, I think saying that we had a brief modulation to F here is not harmful in any way. I think it's totally fine and an accurate description of what's happening if we look at this cadence in this context. So, okay, moving on. So, of course, this one chord is now 3 in the key of D minor, because it's just a strange, chord progression. We're looking ahead to the next cadence. We have a half cadence in the key of D minor. We're cadencing on A major here. So we have C sharp, A, E, and A. It's a 5/6 chord. A major over C. And then we have D, A, D, and F. There's our tonic triad. E, G, C, and C. That would be our C major triad, which would be a 7 chord in first inversion. And that would usually be followed by 3. So whether you want to analyze this as 7 or 5/6 of 3, I think both are valid. We don't see flat 7. I don't know, at least in harmony, maybe this is just my personal bias, but we don't see flat 7 chords all that often. We usually see them as part of a cycle of fifths, right? Falling fifths, like 1, 4, 7, 3. And 7 going to 3 is exactly the same thing as saying 5 of 3. So However you analyze it, I think it's 6 of one, half dozen of another, because immediately afterwards we get F, C, F, and A. This G is a 9/8 suspension over it, but it's just a 3 afterwards. So however you analyze it, I think it's okay. I'm trying to get more familiar with 7 chords, so that's going to be my primary analysis, but I don't think one is any more correct than the other the more that I look at Bach's music. So then we have G, E, E, and G. Another interesting chord, right? It sort of brings us back here. We don't have a B flat. We don't have a B actually at all. So we don't know the quality of this chord, the chord's gender, right? We know that it's some type of 2 chord. We know that we have Roman numerals that are lowercase because E to G is a minor third, and G and E is definitely the root of the chord. There's no G chord that has E in it that would be within the harmonic vocabulary of Bach. It would be too extended. It would take a couple of centuries. But we're going to call it some type of 2 chord. And then we see all the voices moving on the next beat, so we're going to try and analyze it. A, F, D, and F. That is a D minor triad, but this time it's in second inversion, and that's kind of interesting. It is a passing chord though, so it's within the boundaries of what the textbook would say. Then we have B flat, E, C sharp, and G. Another 7/4/2 chord. Remember, we encountered this chord at the beginning of this system. It's a C sharp diminished 7th over B flat. Have some passing tones in the inner voices. And then we have a cadence on 5. So this is kind of like if we were to cadence on this chord right here, that would be the progression. But we're seeing the same progression as before. This 7/4/2, this dominant 7th chord, or this leading tone chord that would usually function as a dominant being seen as a predominant, or being used as a predominant here. It's really fascinating. Yes, so if we move ahead looking towards the last cadence, we have a perfect authentic cadence in D minor. So we're smooth sailing. There's no modulations that happen in between now and the end of the piece. So we have C sharp, A, E, and G. That's A7 over C sharp, so no need to rechange the Roman numeral, just the figured bass. Then we get D, A, D, and F. We would expect that to go to a 1 chord, a D minor chord. All these voices move. It's kind of like a passing 7th chord in the upper voices because we have C, E, and G. But over a D pedal, I don't think it's worth analyzing. G sharp, A, B, and D. G sharp, F, B, and D. That is a G sharp fully diminished 7th chord in root position, so we know it's a 7 of something, and it's a 7 of 5 because A is the 5 of the key. We expect it to be major, but interestingly enough, we have A, E, A, and C natural, so we have a lowercase 5 with a passing tone in the alto. Really interesting, because what happens on the next beat is that we have some cross relations, this really interesting thing that happens where it's really weird. We have C, then we have C sharp on the next beat under F, this tritone, which is interesting. Or no, it's not a tritone, I'm sorry, that's a diminished 4th, not an augmented 4th. Yeah, interesting nonetheless. We have some close cross relations that just change the quality of the triad. So we have A, C sharp, and F. So unless there's another augmented 3 chord going on right here in first inversion, I think this C sharp's an accented non-chord tone, and in fact we actually have a 1/6/4 chord here, A, D, and F, in anticipation for the cadence, of course. But let's see what happens on the next beat. Well, we also have B natural sort of interrupting things, so B, A, D, and F. The counterpoint makes it difficult, but that would make this a 6 diminished 6. But I'll put that in parentheses depending on how you choose to analyze what's going on. Then we have C sharp, A, E, and E. That is a 5/6 chord, an A major triad over C sharp. We have some non-chord tones here, which would technically turn the chord into a 1 chord here, passing. And we'll mark that because 5 wants to go to 1, why not? And then we have A, G, and C sharp. That's a 5-7 chord. So we kind of have like this really big 5-7 bracket because 1, 6, 4, and 5 are related to one another. I guess the one way to verify that would be to see if the F and the D move down to E and C sharp. F moves down to E, and D does not move down to C sharp. Well, D moves down to C sharp here, but it's complicated. I think there's just counterpoint going on here, so 1s and 5s are blending together, and if they so happen, it's because they share a bass or they share a tone. And then we get a big 1 here with a 4-3 suspension over the bass and a 6-5 suspension over the bass. And that wraps up today's chorale. Definitely a very difficult chorale, all things considered. The harmonic rhythm was made very ambiguous by all of the counterpoint. Should I analyze some chords? Should I omit some chords? I try to use my intuition, but sometimes it fails me, and I offer the analysis because there is a chord to be analyzed there, but it's not fully consistent, which breaks one of my rules, or really my most important rule, which is if you're going to analyze something, you're looking for the consistencies. That's kind of the point of the analysis, or at least one of the bigger points of analysis is to try and find consistency or patterns in the music, right? So you should be consistent with your analysis if you're looking for musical consistencies. But all in all, I really enjoyed the analysis. It challenged me. It always challenges me to see minor 5 chords, and it challenges me to see chords that don't usually go from one to the next, because I'm like, I have to go out of my comfort zone to really embrace the music. Like, this challenges my norms. Is this okay? And of course it's okay. The music sounds beautiful. It was composed during the time, and it's totally cool. But that being said, I look forward to tomorrow's analysis as well. I look forward to it as much as I looked forward to analyzing this chorale. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you for supporting the channel by continuing to watch my videos, and I hope you take care.